Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we're going to look at what animals can teach us. With me is Miranda Alcott. She is an intuitive animal communicator. She is also the author of a chapter on listening to water in an anthology by Masaru Emoto called The Healing Properties of Water. Welcome, Miranda.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to be with you once again. And the topic of learning, what we can learn from animals, I have to think that the very first thing for a person to be able to learn from an animal is to believe that they can, because I think many people have the attitude that we are so vastly superior, there's nothing that we can learn.
It is true. As a species, we have a bit of an ego challenge with that. We consider ourselves the top of the chain in everything. Yeah. And it's actually not accurate. There are cetaceans that actually function in a broader spectrum, and we are fast in the way we process information in our brains. But for a long time, we've assumed that bigger means that we have a better brain for body size. However, we're finding out that's not actually true. That's not accurate.
Of course, we have opposable thumbs. Yes. We make tools. Yes, we tell stories.
Yes, but then so do crows and so do chimps. And there are a lot of beings that we share. Bees I find absolutely fascinating. And perhaps we'll get into that. But if we start looking at who's around us, there's so much to learn. And of course, many indigenous beings already study what the animals have to teach us. But on a daily basis, one of my favorite stories is when I used to have a cat named Fred. And when I was dating, Fred the man would come to pick me up. So I'd let him in the door while he'd walk up the stairs and come into the living room, and my cat would look him over and either go, pfft, or would warm to the person. And 9 times out of 10, he would just blow the person off. And it got to be so irritating because he would know who that person was before I did. So then I went through a phase of when I would let the man in, I would put the cat out because I wasn't having any dating life at all, because I knew Fred was right on. But I learned the hard way to follow what the signals Fred was giving me, because he knew energetically who I would fit with.
And are you suggesting that the cat could read the moral character of the person, or more like the energy? More
like the energy, because that cat knew who I was. We lived together. So from his perspective, he was looking at, was it a fit or not? Was it going to be a problem or not? And so there are many couples that get, young couples usually, that get an animal because they want to see what they'd be like with a baby. So they bring in an animal, and that animal creates all kinds of challenges for both of them to deal with, and they have to deal with it. Many times the people are not ready to hear that they're not ready. But many times an animal will reflect back to us what it is we're working on. So for instance, a very obvious thing is when we have an angry person who's upset in their lives, and if you would ask them, they would say they weren't angry. And they adopt a dog, and the dog comes into the family, and that dog becomes more aggressive, that dog becomes very unhappy, that dog becomes on edge. And the human is saying, Miranda, make him stop. And it's really a matter of counseling with the human and the animal, because it's a matter of addressing, by any chance, have you been tense lately? Because this is really a living barometer. This is not someone who came to upset your life. This is someone who's letting you know where you are in your life. Sometimes that's hard to hear.
Well, that's an example of you teaching the human, not the animal directly.
Right. Because as far as the animals teaching us, they reflect back to us what our behaviors are. If we pay attention, we can learn from the animals what they are teaching us.
Okay, but I am guessing that at a deeper level, I'm going to call it a karmic level, animals also come with something to teach us, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Sometimes they come knowing that they're going to have a shorter life. Sometimes they come knowing that the person they're working with, they're going to have a long journey with, to get them to learn self-reliance, to get them to learn how to love, to get them to learn how to trust. These are things that animals teach us by their behaviors, by their personalities. But I find most of the profound teachings usually are verbalized toward the end of that animal's life. When the human is accepting, this is really happening, my animal is transitioning, and is there anything he wants to tell me? And many times the animal will say, what did you learn from me? And that's when the human has to come out with, what have they learned? And again, this is where you are serving as a mediator. Right, absolutely.
Because without somebody who is an intuitive communicator, such as yourself, many people aren't going to hear their animal.
Well, and we'll have an exercise to help them hear as well. As a matter of fact, we might as well just talk about that now, an exercise. A really simple exercise, it's wonderful to do, that everyone can do at home, is if your animal is in another room and asleep or lying down, you go into your living room, wherever, and you sit and you close your eyes and quiet yourself inside. Then picture your animal in your mind and non-verbally call your animal to you. Now, the first time I did this exercise, I just was trying to figure out, how can people do this? How will this happen? But the first time I tried this exercise, I didn't have all the hearing equipment, the hearing dog, or anything that I had. And I had my very first hearing dog in another room. So I sat down, closed my eyes, quieted, and inside I was saying, radar, radar.
That's the name of...
That was the name of my dog. And I sat there thinking, oh, this is going to take forever. And then it hit me, Miranda, how are you going to know that your dog is here unless you open your eyes? You're hearing impaired. So I opened my eyes, and here he was checking his watch, sitting right in front of me. He had been there for who knows how long. He'd come in from the other room.
Wait, now hold on. Checking his watch?
Which is an expression I have. It's an expression I use because I could tell he'd been sitting there for quite some time while I had been wondering if he was going to come, Being hearing impaired, I couldn't hear him come in.
In other words, you're communicating telepathically.
Absolutely.
With your animal, but you didn't know that the animal had moved.
No. Because of my hearing impairment. So I was thinking, I don't know if this exercise is going to help.
But you could have picked that up telepathically, too.
Well, I was a little impatient. But I have people that tell me they hear their animals after they've transitioned. Sometimes they will hear toenails on the floor. Sometimes they'll feel them brush into them. And as a matter of fact, I just had a wonderful border collie, not border collie, but rough collie, who transitioned recently, and he sends his humans songs. Now, what's interesting about that is she will put her iPod on shuffle, and she will be quiet, and she'll say, I miss James. And the next thing that comes up is a song they used to dance to, Happy Together. And it is so satisfying.
Well, we're going to do a whole other interview on the question of the afterlife as it pertains to humans and animals and pets and so on. But I'm very interested in the idea that the animals, by their very nature, understand certain, I'm going to say, spiritual principles that typically elude most humans. For example, be here now.
Yes. Yeah. Very present. Animals are very present. They watch our patterns. They watch our behaviors. They know so much more about us than we know about them. So someone will say, what is my animal trying to tell me? And I'll say, be quiet. And what did your animal just do? You tell me, what did you just do? And what did your animal just do? And they will say, well, I have been impatient. I have been. And what was your animal doing? Lying on my feet. So that animal was keeping you from moving? Well, yeah. What happens when you don't move? I have to slow down. You think? So those are things that when people get into looking in that way, it's not that far of a reach. It really isn't. If anything, it's relaxing back into.
Well, that sounds, again, it's like energetic. The animals are picking up on our energy, and if we're feeling, I use the word frazzled, and the animal is they're either going to get that from us, or maybe they'll find a way to help us get out of that space.
And also when someone knocks on the door, or if you have a visitor come, watch what your animal does. Because if your animal weaves in between, there's a protection going on. If your animal goes to the side and watches, there's an uncertainty there. There's so much going on that we just need to watch. But many times the lessons come when people are in their dream state or a meditative state.
I see.
And then they will actually see this animal, and they'll say to me, I got the sense, this is so strange, that he was trying to tell me to slow down, or he was trying to tell me that he doesn't like this person, or he doesn't, and I don't know what to do with that, or I don't know how to be.
Let me ask you this question. Humans are very talented at sort of not being in the here and now, and as a result of that, we have fantasies. We can sometimes occupy a fantasy world, or we have a projection of the future. We have an image of the past. We have a sense of time as being much larger than the here and now moment. How is it for animals?
That's fascinating. Animals follow us, have a tendency to follow us and watch what we do. So remember that when we are imagining and moving forward or back or expanding, we're visualizing that. That is one of the common languages that we share with most species. So we're not saying anything, but we're visualizing it, just as we visualize we may be going on a walk and the dog is up and already at the door and we haven't moved. They see the pictures. That's the common way. And as humans, we picture just about everything that we do. So looking at it from the standpoint of what an animal has to teach us, it really comes to, are we willing to listen? Are we willing to hear in more than very real physical way? We have to be able to allow ourselves to expand and receive in that expansion. So animals are not, they are in the present. They teach us to be in the present. But when we're in our dream state, they too have other states that they're in that join us. I
see. In other words, they dream.
We know we've seen them dream, but they join us in what we are visualizing. They're joining. It's the same thing, really, Jeffrey, when people say, I had this dream and it was just so real. Well, those ones that are just so real are very much joined by our animals. We can see our animals usually in the lucid dreams. We can. So they are not limited to this body.
So we're sharing many states of consciousness with animals in our lives. And obviously different species and different varieties of animals have different personalities, and therefore I suppose the lessons that we might learn from them are going to be somewhat dependent on their personality.
Somewhat dependent on their personality, somewhat dependent on their species, because we're looking at a different culture than ours. We have a tendency to say, if this animal is really speaking, he has to speak in English, or he has to show me, and that's so limited. That's where our egos come in. We need to stop, get off of that, settle down, and watch and learn about the other cultures. I remember one time I was watching a nature film on television, and they were talking about sea creatures communicating with each other, and they weren't even, actually I shouldn't say that, they weren't addressing the communication. They were saying, this is how they spawn, this is what they do. And in the background, this was a biology show, in the background were tanks of live lobsters. So the man's standing in front and he's talking, and behind him, I see over on one side, I see a lobster do this. On the other side, I see a lobster do that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm seeing a language here. And the man is talking right ahead. Now, That was very exciting to me. I didn't know what to do with it. I put it into my sleep state, and sure enough, here comes the language, and I'm seeing it in my sleep state. Yes, that is a whole nother language. This is not just because the water is going this way. So again, it's a matter of us opening up. What can we learn? That there's a lot more going on than we thought.
In other words, like humans, animals use body language.
Yes.
And it's going to be very different for each species.
Yes. Different culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, just as we know that dogs looking each other in the eye, that's a challenge to talk. That's, fight. Come on out into the street.
Yeah.
You know, so it is best when we are hugging our dogs to do that with the head, not that. It's a mixed message. That is a mixed message.
That's like sort of wired into them. Huh?
Yes, it is. It's natural for them.
Well, one of the things that I believe dogs are especially skilled at, certainly I think more than cats, is the idea of unconditional love for the humans in their lives.
Yeah. It's true. Cats demand a higher level of that expectation. So
they want it from the human. But dogs offer unconditional love, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely unconditional love. And you know, we have a wonderful goal line that we live on as humans. I want to do this in my life. I want to accomplish that. And then we have the soul line of how we are progressing and what we're doing.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that the intersection of the soul line and the goal line is where most domestic animals are, because they actually bring us back to feeling love. Yeah. They actually remind us what we are here for and what we're here to share and learn. Yeah. And animals have so much to give to us, but we have to learn to listen. Yeah. We must. Yeah.
Well, now, we've talked about being quiet and trying to communicate with the animal in a quiet state. We've talked about what you might pick up in a dream. We've talked about working with a mediator, such as yourself, an intuitive communicator. I would think that the risk in any of these for a skeptical person, and surely we all have a skeptical side, is how do I know it's not just projection on my part, that I'm anthropomorphizing the animal?
For people that want to test that and that want to hold back, they can. But I would suggest that they then take the chance of going swimming with animals, of exercising with animals, and watching if they will allow the animal to guide them. The animal will take them to a different venue. Just yesterday, a woman was telling me about how she was walking her dog on the sidewalk, and her dog all of a sudden had never had this behavior, quickly pulled her into the street. And she was extremely worried because there were cars going by, but as the animal had pulled her into the street, here came a man up on the sidewalk. And this dog was pulling her away. And so she'd never seen her dog act this way. But she followed that lead, and as he started to talk, he said, "I lost my dog, and that's a nice dog." And her whole feeling, she got it secondarily to her animal, and she said, "Yes, I have to walk my dog really fast because he needs exercise." If we listen, it's there. We have so many stories of dolphins, all kinds of cetaceans moving us in different directions, leading us to things that we need to know.
Well, there are examples of cetaceans, dolphins in particular, saving the lives of humans.
Absolutely.
And I know the Maori people in New Zealand, they call themselves the people of the dolphin. I believe they believe that, the dolphins brought them to New Zealand.
Yes.
Originally.
And Maori are wonderful. Yes, they are. They really understand so much about what's going on.
Yes, they do. I did some wonderful interviews with a New Zealand naturalist, Wade Doak, who had very, very extensive human-animal interactions with the dolphins, and he would always go to the Maori shaman when he needed to interpret what was being said.
Yeah, I had the wonderful joy of working with some the Maori chief in that situation, and they handed me a wonderful stone, and I did not know what it was, but I held it. And what I saw and where I was taken was with a huge whale, way deep to the point where I was scared because I couldn't see anything. It was cold and it was dark, but I could feel this wonderful whale. I just trusted and was with this whale. So when I came out, it was a meeting, and many of the tribe were there. And when I came out, I said, I don't know what this is, but this is where I went. And he said, Miranda, that is a whale ear bone you are holding, which was very sweet. But that trust of that, and the Maori hold that so dear. They do not take animal life for granted.
Well, you started by saying that indigenous people seem to understand that they have a lot to learn from animals, something that we in the so-called civilized world seem to have lost.
There are animals that are constantly trying to tell us that our planet is at danger. There are many species that have left the earth because we are too late in recognizing what we need to do. There's another example of listening to animals. We can say, well, what do we need this species for? But the danger signals are all there. It's already happening. It's already happening.
Well, we're living in the middle of one of the largest mass extinctions in geological history.
We are, and it is very serious. It is very serious.
And it's caused by our species.
Yes, it is. We own that one completely. And I, for many years, I would hear the animals say to me, we have to do something. You have to tell your people, Miranda, you have to tell your people. What's interesting about my working with the animals is I was gifted and told that I would be working with more humans if I worked with their animals. And it's true, the animals don't really have the issues. We do. And so someone can come in and say, you tell him and you tell him about the animal. And what happens is the animal is saying, help her out. She doesn't have a clue. And so it's a matter of how do we integrate, and if you were in his position, what would you do? How would you get your attention and how would you do this? It's just a little bit of weaving, but then people come back to me and say, I saw him do this, I saw him do that, I followed him and he took me. So it can happen. We just have to allow it.
Well, what is it about indigenous people that makes them more open to this?
In the beginning, their beginning beliefs were not as distracted as ours have been. The more modernized we become, the more we turn off our intuitive selves. So we're not listening to our intuition. Indigenous people pride themselves on their intuition. Now, depending on where you are now, most indigenous people are very challenged right now because of what we've done with the planet. So even though they have that core in them, they may not be as in touch with it as they used to be. But what's also interesting is there's a whole movement of people that are non-indigenous, and there's some indigenous teachers that point to those people and say, those people are more indigenous than some of us. Because that rebirthing and coming back around in that circle of learning is occurring again, and it needs to be, and massively occurring.
I wonder if part of the problem is that many humans, we don't even think of ourselves as animals anymore. And we are. We're mammals.
We are. We are animals.
We're vertebrates.
We are just one species.
Right.
We think that because we populate all over, that another species has to prove to us that they are intelligent. And it's interesting because there isn't really a great definition of intelligence, which is fascinating to me, because all you're doing is comparing us against everyone else. You're saying they have to prove this to us before we'll...
Well, you're touching upon another topic that I hope to do a separate interview on, the distinction between human and animal. Because I know we have so much in common, but there are differences.
Definitely, there are differences. Big differences,
So that'll be a topic for another time.
I look forward to that. I look forward to that.
But we've just a couple of minutes left. And is there a final thought that you might have for people who really sense that their animal is trying to teach them something?
Yeah.
Is there anything further that they might do to open up to that?
You know, one of the things that's simple that people think about and they don't follow through with, and that is when they're leaving their house, because they have animals in their home, when they're leaving their homes, to turn to the animal and say out loud, because we picture when we're saying and when we're thinking it, I'm going to be gone for a few hours. I'll be back before dark, and I need you to look after the house. I need you to protect the house. And then you leave. You picture yourself coming back before dark as you're leaving. Picture that. Now you come home and you open the door and the animals are excited to see you, but you don't actually pet them or acknowledge until you look around the house and see the house is safe. Good job. Now everybody's excited and they're going off, pat, pat, pat. Giving them a time frame gives them security. Because being in a home, they are totally dependent on us.
Yeah.
So it's a simple way. It's a simple way to share your lives with your animals in such a way, and they're sharing their lives with their humans, that everyone can feel more grounded.
There's a lot of profundity in there, because what you're saying is just by speaking,
yes,
they may not be able to interpret our words, but they see the pictures in our mind.
Yes.
So we can speak.
Yes.
To our animals.
You can speak to your animals. And you'd be surprised how many domestic animals actually know sentences and words. They're exposed to us. Yeah.
Well, Miranda Alcott, once again, this has been an enlightening time. Thank you so much for being with me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm excited. Thank you for asking.
My pleasure. And thank you for being with us.